Don DeLillo's book Point Omega starts with a character in an art gallery watching an art installation made up of slowing down Alfred Hitchcock's movie Psycho so that it goes through its runtime once every 24 hours. By slowing down the movie and having it play through almost frame by frame, the people in the gallery say they can see things they couldn't before, and watching scenes like the iconic shower scene move in slow motion gives it an added sense of dread and anticipation. Even knowing how the scene ends, just watching the knife move through the air inch by inch and Janet Leigh's face slowly forming into a scream adds another layer of context to the original and makes it even more interesting. And then there's John Wick. John Wick is about as far from that scene as you could possibly imagine. Instead of watching a car crash in slow motion, imagine watching the same car crash happen 1,000 times a second in different settings, lighting, and all ending with a one-liner from Keanu Reeves. And you'd still only be about halfway to summing up the absolute spectacle that is John Wick. I ended up watching the John Wick 3 movie completely by chance. I couldn't go home for a couple of hours and had some Cineplex points to burn, and scrolling through the theater's website realized that John Wick 3 was coming out on Friday, and on impulse just bought a ticket. I got seated all the way in the front just like I deserved, between the better halves of two separate couples, and behind a middle-aged man who was losing his hair and ended up scratching my knee en route to scratching his bald spot a couple times during the movie, but I didn't mind. At least I got to watch it. And if you're not going to sit in the front row for a John Wick movie, then when are you really? On a side note, I didn't know what these guys were doing bringing their dates to a John Wick movie in the first place, but after the very first death of the movie, both women already had their faces buried in their dates' arms, and that pretty much happened on repeat for every gruesome death that followed. And if you haven't seen a John Wick movie before, you should know the body count Keanu Reeves leaves behind him is pretty insane. And so, without meaning to, I found myself watching the movie through the eyes of a newcomer. Someone who hasn't seen a million action movies or even the first two John Wick movies. Someone who doesn't see the inspiration that every action scene takes from the giants that have come before it and just sees the movies for what it is, with no context. John Wick is a circus of death. It's a movie only in the sense that you watch it in a theater. In all other senses, it's performance art. Watching any of the trailers put out before its release, and you can see Keanu Reeves and Halle Berry throwing around stunt people and practicing choreography, going through target practice and practicing flips and rolls, and listening to the director Chad Stahelski, who coordinated the stunts for The Matrix, it becomes very clear where the focus of the movie lies. All this time, money, and effort put into running through the shots again and again to get them perfect, and what do we get? Probably the greatest action movie we have ever seen, until it gets topped when they make the fourth one whenever Keanu feels like rolling out of bed. Every second of every action sequence in John Wick 3 felt like looking through the window into how being a stunt actor works. Almost every shot is a long take, with Keanu pausing to reload clumsily before putting an unnecessary amount of bullets into the skulls of every person he beats into a pulp. An absolute stunning variety of weapons used from swords to knives, both thrown and up close, belts, and of course, guns. It wouldn't be John Wick without guns. Oh, and there's 2 dogs this time, so don't even worry about that. Well, technically 3, but one just shows up for fan service. So guns, dogs, and manslaughter. What else do you need for a good night out, right? Jokes. Jokes would probably help. At this point in 2019, if every blockbuster movie doesn't have at least one laugh-out-loud moment, it would feel completely out of place. We can thank the Marvel movies for that. But action movies, of course, have a much longer history with comedy, in no small part thanks to the most famous kung fu comedian of our time, Jackie Chan, who himself started out as a stunt actor. John Wick doesn't go that far, though the theater I was in laughed a good few times, including at the scene with this movie's version of the Kareem Abdul-Jabbar fight from Game of Death, starring 7'4" backup center for the Philadelphia 76ers, Mr. Boban Marjanovic. Speaking of 1970s Hong Kong action movies, every long action set piece in this movie reminded me of famous scenes from other kinds of movies. Close-up knife fights in close quarters that drew inspiration from The Raid, fast-paced fist fights with crowds of thugs being thrown through every glass surface imaginable that look a lot like early Jackie Chan movies, and of course the long takes and gun kata style that The Matrix popularized in the West, and which John Woo got a bad rap for doing back in the 80s. Each of them individually are spectacular to watch, but when they're blended together in a scene, with John Wick executing a thug with his gun only to run out of ammo and have to use improvised weapons, or just straight up weapons that he just finds lying around to get rid of the people in his way, things just go to another level, and watching the movie in real time really doesn't do it justice. After about 8 minutes of watching Keanu Reeves and Halle Berry just exterminate an entire town of henchmen, my eyes definitely began to glaze over, and there are only so many headshots you can see before the staccato gunfire starts to get into your head and you just feel like taking a long nap. That's not to say the fights are boring. If anything, it's probably the opposite. There are so many little details and references to other action movies and famous fight scenes in every violent scene of John Wick that you would really need to see it in slow motion to appreciate every detail. John Wick is a spectacle in its purest form. Violence, weapons, death, all stitched together into a tapestry of aesthetic perfection made by action aficionados for action aficionados. And it's not like the movie is unaware of this. Tattooed on the neck of one of the villains is the German word Einfühlung, a word loosely translated as empathy in English, first coined by the German philosopher Robert Vischer, used in his doctoral thesis on the optical sense of form, a contribution to aesthetics. And I'm not even going into the numerous references to Dante's Inferno, even from the very start of the movie, and how closely John Wick's journey in the movie resembles the journey Dante takes in the Divine Comedy. We're even told that the path to paradise begins in hell during the movie, but this video is getting long, so I'll probably save that for another day. And so, we come back to the beginning. Like the character in Don DeLillo's Point Omega, I left the theater with a mishmash of feelings. Sometimes when you watch something, it takes a while to process just how much effort went into it. Mr. Nose C's numinous AMV was the first time I felt like this, Endless Justice Horseshoe Finale being the other time, and afterwards you're kinda just left wondering where to go from here. John Wick has taken inspiration to such a level that we've left pastiche somewhere behind us in the dust, and we're just in a whole new world. And God, I do hope we get another one.